On our wedding night, she screamed, "I regret marrying you, I still love him." I just nodded, packed my bags, and left. The woman I just married was having a complete breakdown in our honeymoon suite, and suddenly everything made sense. I'm Connor Wells, 32, and I work as a cybersecurity analyst in Atlanta. I thought I'd married the woman of my dreams that morning. Melody and I had what everyone called the perfect wedding at the historic Fox Theater, followed by a reception at the Georgian Terrace Hotel that had our guests raving about the food and the string quartet I'd insisted on hiring. Melody looked absolutely stunning in her vintage lace dress, and when she walked down the aisle, I genuinely believed I was the luckiest man alive. We'd been together for 2.5 years, engaged for 8 months, and I'd planned every detail of this wedding to be exactly what she dreamed of. The photographer captured hundreds of perfect moments, the cake was flawless, and even Melody's notoriously difficult mother Diane seemed happy. When we left for the Ritz-Carlton honeymoon suite, I was already thinking about our future children and the house we'd start looking for next spring. But the moment we walked through the door of that beautiful suite overlooking Peachtree Street, everything changed. Melody went straight to the minibar and started drinking like she was trying to forget something terrible. When I suggested we should probably slow down since we had an early flight to Hawaii the next morning, she just poured another vodka and stared out the window with this hollow expression I'd never seen before. "Melody, what's wrong? You've been acting strange since we left the reception." She turned around with tears streaming down her face, mascara ruining the makeup that had looked perfect all day. "I can't do this, Connor. I thought I could, but I can't." "Can't do what? The marriage? The honeymoon? Talk to me. I've been thinking about him all day. During the entire ceremony, during our first dance, even when you were giving your speech about how much you love me. I kept thinking about Sebastian. Sebastian, her ex-boyfriend from 3 years ago, the struggling artist she'd dated for 6 months before we met. I'd heard his name maybe 5 times in our entire relationship, always in passing, never with any indication that she still had feelings for him. "Melody, you're just having wedding day jitters. It's normal to think about the past when you're making such a big commitment." "No, you don't understand. I still love him. I never stopped loving him. I thought marrying you would make those feelings go away, but they're stronger than ever. I made a terrible mistake today." The words hit me like ice water. My new wife was telling me she'd married me hoping to get over another man. "Are you saying you don't love me?" "I love you, but not the way I love him. You're safe, Connor. You're stable and kind and you'd make an amazing husband for someone, but you're not him. You'll never be him." I sat down on the edge of the king-sized bed we were supposed to share for the first time as husband and wife, trying to process what I was hearing. "So what exactly are you telling me?" "I regret marrying you. I should have called off the wedding this morning when I woke up thinking about Sebastian instead of you. I should have been honest months ago, but I convinced myself that what we had was enough. It's not enough, Connor. It will never be enough." She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably, while I sat there in my wedding tuxedo watching my marriage implode 6 hours after it began. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd spent $85,000 on a wedding for someone who wished she was marrying someone else. I stood up, walked to the closet, and started packing my overnight bag while Melody continued crying on the couch. There wasn't much to think about. Staying would mean begging someone to want me, and I'd never been that kind of man. I folded my clothes methodically, the same way I approached everything else in my life, while she watched me with growing panic. "Connor, please don't leave. I'm just confused. Wedding stress makes people say crazy things they don't mean." I kept packing. "You meant every word. The only thing you regret is saying it out loud. We can work through this. Couples therapy, a delayed honeymoon, whatever you need. Just don't give up on us." I zipped up my bag and grabbed my car keys from the dresser. "There is no us, Melody. There's you, there's me, and there's Sebastian living in your head. That's one person too many for a marriage." I walked out of that suite at 11:47 p.m., leaving my wife of 6 hours alone with a bottle of vodka and her regrets. The drive to my downtown loft took 20 minutes through empty Atlanta streets, and my phone started buzzing before I even made it to the interstate. Text after text, call after call, all from Melody begging me to come back, promising she didn't mean it, swearing she'd chosen me for a reason. I turned off the phone and drove in silence, already knowing I'd never sleep in the same bed as her again. What I didn't know was that hotel security had been called to our suite twice that night because Melody's breakdown had gotten so loud that neighboring guests were complaining. My best man Tyler got the first call around 1 a.m., and when he couldn't reach me, he assumed I'd done something terrible to upset my new bride. By morning, Tyler was telling anyone who'd listened that I'd probably gotten cold feet and abandoned poor Melody on our wedding night like some kind of monster. The narrative spread through our friend group like wildfire. Connor Wells, the guy who'd seemed so devoted to his fiancée, had apparently shown his true colors the moment the pressure was on. Meanwhile, Melody had made her way down to the hotel bar around midnight, still in her wedding dress, telling the bartender and any patron who'd listen her version of events. According to her story, I was an insecure man who couldn't handle her being honest about having doubts, and instead of fighting for our marriage like a real husband would, I'd run away at the first sign of conflict. He promised to love me through everything, but the moment I needed support, he walked out, she told the late-night crowd, painting herself as the victim of my emotional abandonment. By Sunday morning, our entire social circle had heard some version of what happened, and the reactions split along predictable lines. Most of the guys, especially the married ones, understood exactly why I'd left. If my wife told me she still loved her ex on our wedding night, I'd be gone too, my friend Marcus told Tyler when he finally heard the real story. But most of the women in our group thought I should have stayed and fought harder. Marriage is about working through problems, not running away the moment things get difficult, Melody's friend Jessica posted on social media, clearly taking sides. The irony was that none of them knew the actual words Melody had said to me in that suite. They didn't know she'd explicitly told me she regretted marrying me and still loved another man. They just knew that a bride was crying in a hotel bar while her new husband was nowhere to be found, and that was enough to form their opinions. Tyler finally came to my loft Sunday evening, expecting to find me drunk and devastated, ready to talk me into calling Melody and working things out. Instead, he found me doing laundry and meal prepping for the week ahead, completely sober and surprisingly calm. Dude, what the hell happened up there? Melody's been calling me all day saying you just left without explanation. She explained everything perfectly. She still loves Sebastian and regrets marrying me. What exactly was I supposed to fight for? Tyler's expression changed as the reality of what I was saying sank in. She actually said that? On your wedding night? Word for word. Along with telling me I'll never be him and that what we have isn't enough. Jesus, Connor. I had no idea. Everyone's been saying you freaked out over normal wedding jitters. Everyone's been getting their information from someone who spent the night in a hotel bar playing victim instead of facing what she'd actually done. That's when Tyler admitted he'd heard shouting coming from our suite when he'd walked past around 11 p.m., including Melody's voice saying something about Sebastian, but he'd assumed it was just a minor argument that couples work through. The fact that hotel security had been called twice painted a very different picture than the abandoned bride story Melody was spreading. Monday morning brought the family intervention I'd been dreading. Melody's mother Diane showed up at my loft at 7 a.m., still in her pajamas and slippers, looking like she hadn't slept since the wedding. I opened the door to find her clutching a coffee cup and wearing the same devastated expression I'd seen on Melody's face 2 nights earlier. Connor, thank God you're here. We need to talk about this ridiculous situation. I let her in because she'd always been decent to me, even if she had a tendency to treat every problem like it could be solved through sheer force of will. Diane, I know you're upset, but there's really nothing to discuss. Nothing to discuss? You walked out on your wife on your wedding night over what? Cold feet? Every couple goes through doubts. That's why marriage takes work. She clearly hadn't gotten the real story from her daughter, just some sanitized version where I was the unstable one who couldn't handle normal marital challenges. Did Melody tell you she still loves Sebastian and regrets marrying me? Diane's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. She said you two had a fight about her past relationships and you stormed out like a child. She told me, and I quote, that she'd been thinking about Sebastian during our entire wedding ceremony and that marrying me was a terrible mistake. Those aren't cold feet, Diane. That's someone who married the wrong person. I watched the color drain from her face as the implications hit her. This wasn't about me being unable to handle normal relationship stress. This was about her daughter confessing she'd used our wedding as therapy for getting over another man. My sister Morgan called that afternoon, absolutely mortified by the family embarrassment. As a senior marketing manager at one of Atlanta's biggest tech firms, she was horrified that people in our professional circle were gossiping about the Wells family drama. "Connor, I don't care what Melody said. You can't just abandon a marriage after 6 hours. Do you know what people are saying about our family?" "What are they saying, Morgan?" "That the Wells men can't handle commitment when things get real. Dad's been getting sympathy calls all day from people who think you had some kind of breakdown." My father had built a successful accounting practice over 30 years, and his reputation mattered to him. The idea that people thought his son was emotionally unstable enough to abandon his new wife was probably eating him alive. "Maybe you should tell them what actually happened instead of letting them assume I'm the problem. What actually happened is that you gave up on your marriage before it even started. Successful people work through problems, Connor. They don't run away." The irony of getting lectured about persistence by my sister, who'd been divorced twice, wasn't lost on me. But I was curious about something that had been bothering me since Saturday night, so I finally did what I should have done months ago. I looked up Sebastian online. It took me 5 minutes to find his Instagram account, and what I discovered was both enlightening and pathetic. Sebastian Rivera was exactly what you'd expect from a struggling Atlanta street artist. 2,847 followers, photos of murals around Little Five Points and East Atlanta Village, the kind of cryptic captions that sounded deep but meant nothing. His most recent post was from Sunday morning, less than 12 hours after my wedding imploded. It showed a new mural of a woman walking away from a burning bridge, with the caption, "Sometimes you have to burn bridges to light the way forward." The timing seemed suspicious, especially since Melody had been posting about our wedding on social media for weeks leading up to Saturday. There was no way Sebastian didn't know she'd gotten married that weekend. I scrolled through his other recent posts and found more breadcrumbs. 3 weeks earlier, he'd posted a photo of a painting titled, "The One Who Got Away," a shadowy female figure walking into the distance. 2 months before that, a street mural with the words, "What if?" written in elaborate script. None of it was explicitly about Melody, but the emotional manipulation was obvious to anyone paying attention. This guy had been playing mind games with my fiancée for months, probably enjoying the ego boost of knowing she still thought about him. Tuesday evening, Tyler came by with actual intel instead of assumptions. He'd finally talked to other people who'd been at the hotel that night, and the picture that emerged was far more damaging to Melody's victim narrative than she probably realized. "Dude, I owe you a massive apology," he said, settling onto my couch with a beer. "I talked to the bartender at the Ritz. Melody was down there until almost 3 a.m., completely wasted, telling anyone who'd listen that you couldn't handle her emotional honesty about still having feelings for her ex. She was telling strangers about Sebastian? Worse. She was showing them his Instagram posts, talking about how he's this amazing artist who understands her soul in ways you never could. The bartender said she kept asking if he thought she should call Sebastian and tell him she'd made a mistake. The image of my wife of 6 hours sitting in a hotel bar, drunk in her wedding dress, asking strangers if she should call another man was both pathetic and infuriating. But it also confirmed everything I'd suspected. This wasn't a moment of wedding day panic. This was someone who'd been emotionally cheating throughout our entire engagement and finally couldn't pretend anymore. 2 weeks after the wedding disaster, my phone buzzed with a text from Melody that made my blood run cold. "Connor, I need to see you. I have information about Sebastian that changes everything. Meet me at Café Intermezzo in Little Five Points tomorrow at 2 p.m. Please. This is important." Tyler, who'd become my unofficial advisor on all things Melody-related, thought I was insane for even considering it. "Dude, she's obviously trying to manipulate you back into her life. Whatever she's got to say about Sebastian is probably more lies." But I was curious. What information could she possibly have that would change anything? I'd already accepted that our marriage was over, started the annulment paperwork, and moved on emotionally. Still, There was something about the desperation in her text that made me think she'd learned something significant about her precious Sebastian. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. Café Intermezzo had been our place during the early months of our relationship, when everything felt new and promising. Walking in there felt like entering a museum of my own naivety, but I was determined to hear whatever she had to say and then close this chapter permanently. I arrived exactly at 2 p.m. to find Melody already sitting in our old corner booth, looking like she hadn't slept in weeks. The confident, polished woman I'd married had been replaced by someone hollow-eyed and fragile. Her hair was unwashed, her makeup minimal, and she was wearing an old sweater I remembered her sleeping in during college. "Thank you for coming," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I wasn't sure you would. I'm here. What's this crucial information about Sebastian?" She took a shaky breath and pulled out her phone, scrolling through what looked like months of Instagram messages. "I need to tell you something that I should have told you months ago. Sebastian and I have been talking." "Talking how?" "Messaging. On Instagram. It started about 3 months before our wedding, right after I posted about getting engaged." My stomach dropped, even though part of me had suspected this. "What kind of messages?" "At first, just congratulations on the engagement. Friendly stuff. But then they got more personal. He started asking if I was truly happy, if I ever thought about what we had together, if I ever wondered what would have happened if things had been different between us." She scrolled through the messages, showing me screenshots that made my skin crawl. Late-night conversations about missed opportunities, deep emotional connections, the kind of intimate dialogue that should have been happening between us, not between my fiancée and her ex-boyfriend. "Melody, this is emotional cheating. You were having an affair. I know that now. But at the time, it felt like he was just being a friend. Someone who understood parts of me that you didn't." "What parts?" "The artistic parts. The dreamer parts. Sebastian always encouraged my creative side, made me feel like I could be more than just a social media coordinator posting about other people's houses. I'd actually encouraged her creative writing and photography multiple times throughout our relationship, but apparently Sebastian's encouragement felt more meaningful because it came with romantic undertones and the thrill of secrecy. Keep going. What's this information that changes everything? The night before our wedding, Sebastian sent me this. She showed me a photo of a painting, a woman in a white dress standing at a crossroads, with 2 paths stretching into the distance. The title visible at the bottom read, "The One Who Got Away." He said he'd painted it thinking about me, about the choice I was making. He said he hoped I was choosing the right path, but that he'd always wonder what might have been if I chose differently. "So you went into our wedding ceremony thinking about Sebastian and his painting." I spent our entire wedding day feeling like I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Every time you smiled at me, every time you said your vows, I kept thinking about that painting and wondering if I was choosing safety over passion, settling over true love. The brutal honesty was almost worse than the original confession. She'd stood at that altar, repeated vows she didn't mean, and accepted a ring while fantasizing about running away with another man. "But here's what I found out after our wedding night," she continued, her voice getting stronger. "I drove to Sebastian's studio that Sunday morning. I was going to tell him everything, confess my feelings, maybe see if we could finally be together properly. And he wasn't alone." Her voice cracked. "He was there with this woman, Priya. She's a gallery owner who's been featuring his work. They were intimate. Very obviously together, very obviously in love." I watched her face crumble as she relived the moment her fantasy crashed into reality. When I tried to explain about our messages, about the painting, about what I thought we had, Sebastian looked at me like I was completely delusional. He said he barely remembered our relationship from 3 years ago, that his messages were just friendly catch-ups, nothing romantic. He said Priya was his serious girlfriend and that I needed professional help if I thought our casual conversations meant something more. The irony was almost beautiful. Melody had destroyed our marriage, chasing a man who'd been using her for ego validation while building a real relationship with someone else. Sebastian had been playing games with a lonely, engaged woman while simultaneously falling in love with someone who actually understood and supported his art. He told me to leave and never contact him again. Said if I showed up at his studio again, he'd call the police. She was crying now, real tears of humiliation and loss. I sat in my car outside his studio for 3 hours, watching him work with Priya, watching them laugh and touch each other the way I thought he wanted to be with me. Everything I'd imagined between us was completely one-sided. What Melody told me next revealed just how far she'd fallen down the rabbit hole of her own delusions. After our catastrophic wedding night and her humiliating encounter with Sebastian and Priya, instead of accepting reality and trying to salvage her life, she'd become completely obsessed with proving that Sebastian's feelings for her were real. I went back to his studio the next week, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I needed to talk to him when Priya wasn't around, to make him remember what we had together. Melody, he told you to stay away. I waited until Tuesday evening when I knew the gallery would be closed. Sebastian was there alone, working on a new mural series. When he saw me, he was furious, but I begged him to just listen for 5 minutes. I could picture the scene, my desperate ex-wife cornering a man who'd explicitly told her to leave him alone, convinced she could somehow resurrect a romance that had never existed in the first place. I told him about our wedding night, about how I'd confessed everything to you because I couldn't stop thinking about him. I thought he'd be touched by the sacrifice I'd made, the marriage I'd destroyed for him. And what did he say? He looked at me like I was insane. He said I was a stranger to him, that we'd dated briefly 3 years ago and it meant nothing. He said his Instagram messages were just polite responses to someone from his past, not romantic overtures. Then he told me about Priya. Sebastian and Priya had been together for over a year, living together in a converted warehouse space in the old 4th Ward where he painted and she ran her gallery business. They were planning to get married and had been featured in Atlanta magazine as one of the city's most promising young artistic couples. Everything Melody thought she knew about Sebastian's availability was fantasy. He showed me photos of them together, Connor. Traveling to art fairs, working on collaborative projects, building a real partnership. The way he talked about her, the way his whole face lit up when he said her name, that's how you used to look when you talked about me. The painful irony wasn't lost on either of us. Sebastian had found with Priya exactly what I'd thought I had with Melody, a genuine partnership built on mutual respect and shared dreams. Meanwhile, Melody had convinced herself that his polite responses to her messages were declarations of hidden love. When I tried to remind him about specific things from our old relationship, he couldn't even remember them. The restaurant where we had our first date, the concert we went to, the weekend we spent at Lake Lanier, none of it meant anything to him. I was just another girl he'd dated and forgotten about. But the story got worse. After Sebastian asked her to leave again, Melody had started stalking both his social media and his physical locations. She'd drive past his studio at different times, trying to figure out his schedule. She'd show up at coffee shops and restaurants in his neighborhood, hoping for accidental encounters. She'd even created fake Instagram accounts to view his stories after he blocked her main account. Last week, I followed them to a gallery opening in Buckhead. I watched them together for an hour and Connor, the way he looked at her was how I dreamed he'd look at me. Priya was everything I wasn't: confident, successful, genuinely supportive of his art instead of just claiming to be. The description of Sebastian and Priya's relationship was devastating to Melody in ways that went beyond simple romantic rejection. Priya wasn't just Sebastian's girlfriend, she was his professional partner, someone who'd helped elevate his career by featuring his work in her gallery and connecting him with serious collectors. She understood his artistic vision and had the business knowledge to help him succeed commercially. Meanwhile, Melody worked in social media marketing for a real estate company and had never shown any real interest in contemporary art beyond posting Instagram photos at museum exhibitions. They were celebrating because Priya had sold 3 of Sebastian's pieces to a collector from New York. $15,000 each. Sebastian was finally making real money from his art, and it was because of her support and connections. Melody realized that even if Sebastian had been available, she could never offer him what Priya did: professional advancement, genuine artistic understanding, and the kind of partnership that builds careers rather than just providing emotional support. That's when I understood how completely delusional I'd been. I wasn't the one who got away. I was just someone he'd dated briefly and moved on from completely. Priya was his real partner in every way that mattered. The final humiliation came when Melody tried to approach them at the gallery opening. She'd spent an hour working up the courage to walk over and introduce herself as an old friend, hoping to gauge Sebastian's reaction and maybe understand what Priya had that she didn't. The moment Sebastian saw me, his expression changed completely. He whispered something to Priya, and she immediately understood who I was. They didn't cause a scene, but Sebastian walked over and very quietly told me that if I didn't leave immediately, he'd call security and have me banned from every gallery in Atlanta. He knew you'd been stalking him? Apparently, he'd noticed me at 2 other places in the past month. He and Priya had already discussed getting a restraining order if I kept showing up. Priya said something about not tolerating harassment of her partner, and Sebastian nodded like they'd already had this conversation multiple times. Melody had spent weeks believing she was fighting for true love, when in reality she was a stalker who'd made Sebastian and Priya genuinely concerned for their safety. The woman I'd married had become someone I didn't recognize, desperate, delusional, and dangerously fixated on a man who wanted nothing to do with her. I left that coffee shop knowing I'd dodged the biggest bullet of my life, and within a week, I was sitting in my lawyer's office filing for annulment based on fraud and emotional infidelity. Georgia law allows annulment when one party enters marriage under false pretenses, and Melody's confession about her months-long emotional affair with Sebastian gave me exactly the evidence I needed. My attorney, Patricia Hendricks, had handled dozens of similar cases and wasn't surprised by anything I told her. The Instagram messages alone are enough to prove she entered this marriage dishonestly, she explained while reviewing the screenshots Melody had foolishly shown me. Add in her explicit confession about thinking of another man during the ceremony, and any judge will grant this annulment quickly. The process was surprisingly straightforward. I provided the court with evidence of Melody's emotional infidelity, her wedding night confession, and witness testimony from Tyler about her hotel bar behavior. Melody didn't contest the annulment, probably because fighting it would mean admitting publicly to everything she'd done, and within 6 weeks, our marriage was legally erased like it never happened. No divorce, no alimony discussions, no property division. Just a legal acknowledgement that our marriage had been fraudulent from day one. But while the legal proceedings moved smoothly, Melody's life was falling apart in spectacular fashion. Her social media coordinator position at Premier Realty Atlanta had been her dream job, managing Instagram accounts for million-dollar listings and coordinating marketing campaigns for luxury properties. Unfortunately for her, the real estate world in Atlanta is surprisingly small and gossipy, and word about her wedding night breakdown had spread through the industry faster than she could control the narrative. "Connor, I lost my job," she told me in a panicked voicemail 2 weeks after our coffee meeting. "They said my personal life was affecting the company's professional reputation." Apparently, some clients heard about what happened and were uncomfortable working with someone so unstable. Premier Realty's clientele consisted largely of wealthy, traditional families who valued discretion and stability. Having their social media manager known throughout Atlanta as the woman who confessed to loving another man on her wedding night was apparently not the image they wanted associated with their brand. Melody had been fired with 2 weeks severance and a polite suggestion that she might be happier working somewhere that valued emotional authenticity over professional composure. Without a job and facing the humiliation of explaining her situation to potential employers, Melody moved back in with her parents in suburban Marietta, a devastating blow to someone who'd spent years building an image as an independent city professional. But losing her job was nothing compared to what happened next. Instead of accepting reality and focusing on rebuilding her life, Melody doubled down on her Sebastian obsession in ways that crossed from pathetic into genuinely disturbing territory. She started showing up at every gallery opening, art fair, and cultural event in Atlanta where Sebastian might appear, always lurking in the background, watching him and Priya with an intensity that made other attendees uncomfortable. At the Whitespace Gallery's monthly showcase, she hid behind a pillar for 2 hours taking photos of Sebastian and Priya with her phone. At the East Side Cultural Arts Festival, she followed them from booth to booth, staying exactly 20 feet behind like some kind of deranged private investigator. Other artists in the scene started recognizing her and warning Sebastian when she appeared at events. "Your ex is here again," became a regular heads-up that Sebastian would receive at gallery openings throughout the city. But the real breaking point came when Melody started leaving gifts at Sebastian's studio. First, it was flowers with anonymous notes about true love conquering all. Then paintings she'd attempted herself, crude imitations of Sebastian's style with messages about understanding his artistic soul. Finally, love letters that detailed her fantasies about their life together and her certainty that Priya was just a temporary distraction from their destined romance. Sebastian and Priya tried ignoring the escalation, hoping Melody would eventually get bored and move on. Instead, she became more creative and more invasive. She discovered which coffee shop they frequented and would sit there for hours, pretending to work on her laptop while watching them. She learned Priya's schedule and started accidentally bumping into her at the grocery store, the dry cleaner, even the veterinary office where Priya took their shared cat. The final straw came when Melody broke into Sebastian's studio during the day while he was teaching an art class at a community center. She spent 3 hours rearranging his paintings, leaving new love letters hidden throughout the space, and, most disturbingly, taking selfies of herself surrounded by his artwork, posting them on Instagram with captions about finding inspiration in the space where true art is born. When Sebastian returned and discovered the break-in, he found Melody had also attempted to destroy several paintings that featured Priya as a model, scratching out her face with a palette knife and writing "fake" across the canvases in red paint. Months of work and thousands of dollars in commission pieces were ruined by someone who couldn't accept that her romantic fantasies weren't reality. That incident finally forced Sebastian and Priya to involve the police. They filed for a restraining order backed by security camera footage from the building, dozens of photographs of Melody stalking them at events, and the love letters she'd left as evidence of her unstable mental state. The restraining order was granted immediately, legally banning Melody from coming within 500 feet of Sebastian, Priya, their home, their studio, or any venue where they were scheduled to appear. 6 months after the worst wedding night in Atlanta history, I was sitting in my new penthouse apartment in Midtown, looking out at the city lights and genuinely appreciating how much better my life had become. The promotion to senior cybersecurity consultant had come with a $35,000 salary increase and the flexibility to work remotely when needed. Without Melody's expensive tastes draining my bank account, I'd been able to save enough for a substantial down payment on a place that actually reflected my success rather than my willingness to subsidize someone else's lifestyle. I'd also started dating again, though in a completely different way than before. Instead of falling headfirst into intense relationships, I joined an outdoor activities group where I met Jade, a pediatric nurse at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. She was the opposite of Melody in every way that mattered: financially independent, emotionally stable, and genuinely interested in building something together rather than being taken care of. Our first conversation happened during a group rock climbing session at Stone Summit, where she impressed me by refusing to let anyone help her with routes she could handle herself. "I appreciate the offer," she told a guy who'd tried to mansplain her climbing technique, "but I've been doing this for 3 years. I've got it figured out." That attitude toward independence carried over into our dating life. Jade insisted on paying for her own meals, never asked for expensive gifts, and had her own hobbies and friend groups that didn't revolve around her romantic relationship. She made me remember what it felt like to be chosen rather than needed, wanted rather than exploited. When I told her the story of my marriage catastrophe, she didn't express sympathy for Melody or suggest I should have tried harder to make it work. "She did you a favor by being honest," Jade said simply. "Better to find out someone's using you as a placeholder before you waste years trying to compete with a fantasy." Through our mutual friend network, I continued to hear updates about Melody's downward spiral, and each report confirmed that I'd made the right choice by walking away immediately. The restraining order had become the least of her problems. After violating it twice, once by showing up at an art gallery where Sebastian was supposed to appear, and once by sending him letters through a friend, she'd been arrested and sentenced to mandatory psychological counseling and community service. The arrest had made local news because it happened during the High Museum's annual art auction, where Melody had caused a scene when security tried to remove her. Video of her being escorted out in handcuffs while screaming about true love had gone viral on Atlanta social media, cementing her reputation as the city's most notorious stalker ex. Her parents had apparently staged an intervention after the arrest, threatening to cut off financial support if she didn't get serious about therapy and stop embarrassing the family. Melody was now working at a Target in Marietta, living in her childhood bedroom, and attending court-mandated counseling sessions twice a week. According to Tyler, who'd heard this from Jessica, who'd heard it from Ashley, Melody had finally admitted to her therapist that her relationship with Sebastian had been mostly imaginary and that she'd destroyed her marriage chasing someone who'd never wanted her back. Meanwhile, Sebastian and Priya had used the stalking incident as inspiration for a new art installation about boundaries and consent that had been featured in Atlanta magazine. They'd turned Melody's harassment into successful art that raised awareness about the psychological impact of stalking, ironically giving Sebastian his biggest professional breakthrough yet. The installation, titled Unwanted Attention, had sold to a collector in New York for $50,000, and the accompanying article had described Sebastian and Priya as rising stars in the contemporary art world. Last month, Jade and I were having dinner at Canoe when I spotted someone familiar at the bar. Melody was sitting alone, looking significantly older and more worn than when I'd married her. She was dressed in the kind of bargain clothes you find at discount stores, her hair was obviously colored at home, and she was nursing what looked like her first drink while scrolling through her phone with the desperate attention of someone hoping for any kind of social interaction. When she noticed me, her face went through several emotions: surprise, shame, something that might have been regret. I watched her consider approaching our table, then apparently think better of it when she saw Jade. She left a $5 tip for a $12 drink and walked out without looking back. "Was that her?" Jade asked, having followed my gaze to the exit. "Yeah, that was Melody. She looks rough. Do you feel bad for her?" I considered the question while watching Melody's beat-up Honda Civic pull out of the parking lot. I feel bad that she made choices that led to such a miserable life. But I don't feel responsible for those choices. But she made her bed by lying to you about her feelings and stalking another couple. Now she gets to sleep in it. That's what I appreciated most about Jade, her ability to see situations clearly without getting caught up in misplaced sympathy or romantic notions about fighting for love. She understood that some people create their own problems and that trying to rescue them just enables more destructive behavior. 6 months ago, I'd been married to someone who saw me as a financial safety net while fantasizing about another man. Today, I was in a genuine partnership with someone who chose to be with me every single day, not because she needed me but because she wanted me. The difference was everything. Last week, I found out that Melody had finally been fired from Target for attendance issues and had moved back in with her parents permanently. Meanwhile, Jade and I had started talking about moving in together. Not because either of us needed the financial help, but because we enjoyed each other's company enough to want more of it. Sometimes the best revenge really is just living well while the people who wronged you face the natural consequences of their choices.